A few years ago, I was a university student in Eastern Washington, but dating a girl in Western Washington. I was visiting her for the weekend during the summer when we got into a huge fight around midnight and I left, deciding to head back to my apartment. I mention this for context as to why I was driving through Snoqualmie Pass after 1 in the morning. I'd never gone through the pass so late before, and what is usually a busy stretch of highway on I-90 was completely empty. I went well over an hour without seeing a single vehicle going either way, so naturally I was driving way too fast. At the time I had a '73 Chevy Nova. It wasn't quite the classic, but it had power and a complete lack of AC. Even though it was late at night, the combination of a warm summer night and the large amount of heat that bleeds through from the engine meant that I had my windows down and was sweating. Not far into the east of the mountains, around 1:30, I hit a long stretch of straight road that doesn't have an on-ramp or any way to get into the freeway, when suddenly a set of headlights appeared behind me, something like 200 feet back. I glanced back at the lights, puzzled as to where the vehicle could have possibly come from. I noticed that despite the fact that I was absolutely hauling, the lights were gaining on me. I decided to switch lanes and slow down a bit so it could pass. After a moment, the vehicle, now only half that distance, moved over behind me into the same lane. This is when I began to panic. I'm in the middle of nowhere, haven't seen another vehicle in over an hour, and now I've got some aggressive driver running up on me. I watched as those lights got closer, 60 feet, 50 feet, 40 feet. In seconds it was upon me. I braced against the steering wheel, expecting to get rear-ended by a vehicle going much faster than me now. I watched in my rearview mirror in horror as those headlights blasted right into the back of my vehicle, and suddenly everything froze. Quite literally. Nothing physically hit me, but the whole vehicle frosted over and I could see my own breath. I hit the brakes and did my best to pull over, despite not being able to see through the windshield. Every hair of my body was standing on end. I got out of my vehicle and paced back and forth, examining my car, which was already starting to defrost as streams of water poured down it. There was no damage to my back bumper, and absolutely no sign of whatever vehicle had hit me. I eventually calmed down enough to get back in my car and drive the rest of the way back. Wake my roommates and explain what had just happened. The next time I drove through the area in daylight, right about where I think the ghost car had hit me, there was a very old wooden cross, somewhat overgrown, on the side of the road. As to the location of the cross, I have a few points I like to make. The first is that this was years ago, and so I do not remember the exact location. The cross itself was difficult to spot. It was very washed out wood. It clearly had writing on it at one time, but it wasn't legible going 70 miles per hour, and there was virtually no shoulder to speak of for pulling over. I spotted the cross several times over the next year, but my last year living on the east side, I don't recall seeing it anymore. I cannot say without any certainty if it is still there or not, but my gut tells me it's been torn down by the weather and nature. I did attempt to look up any deaths along there, and almost found too many stories with no exact locations. I eventually decided that I wouldn't have any real way to determine which one it would be. But I was telling a friend about my experience one night while at the Iron Horse Brewery in Ellensburg, and a random older gentleman on the other side of me piped in that he'd seen it before too. He then finished his drink and left, visibly upset. I wish I could have asked him more about his experience. This story goes far back, but despite living here in this smaller city in Ontario, Canada over the last 18 or so years, I first heard about this 4 or 5 years ago. Just outside of town, there was a stretch of road between two main back roads. In between these two stop signs, there is about 2.5 kilometers, which is 1.55 miles for American friends, 7 houses, part of a golf course, and what appears to be a memorial plaque grave. The plaque names a father and son and their death dates. William Christian died July 7, 1910. His son Alexander Christian died December 26, 1922. Now the stories regarding the dates don't make any sense, because the stories I had heard was that the pair were involved in a fatal car accident. However, their death days are 12 years apart. Anyway, back to what I do know. The stories in this area date back to the 1940s, where legend has it, indigenous girls were raped and murdered in the area. A graveyard was formed for the victims, and it was fenced in wrought iron. The fence was then taken down during the Second World War, and it was replaced with a new fence which still stands. In the 1970s, a group of bikers partying in the cemetery threw the headstones onto the road in front of Ghost Hill, smashing them. The one plaque of the father and son is the only one that remains. The fascination behind this area all started when my friend, who lived right at the top of the hill, told me all about it after work one night. He said he and his family who experienced events for years, especially his aunt who lived right in the middle of the road, that is Ghost Hill. According to him, during her 7th birthday party, she began screaming and crying uncontrollably and ran out of the house. She kept screaming and crying until she reached the plaque, where she fell unconscious. When she woke up, she had no recollection of the event, just her parents' word for it. Years later, my friend was driving down the road to head into town. It was a sunny day in July, and not a cloud in the sky, so he was driving his Jeep without the soft top on. When out of nowhere, when passing the plaque, he got drenched with water, as if somebody took a 30-gallon bucket and managed to drop it specifically on him and the Jeep. He stepped out of the Jeep and looked around. The only thing that was wet was him, the Jeep and the radius around the Jeep. On the road, everything else was dry. Still a bright blue sky, and no one went around to have hosed him. He's brought up other experiences too, including seeing a woman dressed in white, bloodied, hair knotted down to her back and screaming at the top of her lungs, right beside the plaque as well. Windows in the car were up, radio was on, and the screams were still heard as he flew past. As he said, he stopped the car to look in the rearview mirror, and she was gone. So all these stories only built up my fascination. I looked online for more info and came across one site about local amateur ghost hunters trying to get more info. In the forums section, lots of locals identified the same few signs of paranormal experiences dating back to the 60s, when this was a popular route to the nearby drive-in theater. When you begin your journey on Ghost Hill, people typically experience these things. A purple light to warn the driver of impending danger. The ghost of a teenage boy waiting by the plaque asking for help. If you slow down, he will grab the door handle. A ghost car will chase you down a stretch of road. The face of an unknown apparition that will appear in the window of your car and follow directly beside you. And finally, the plaque will light up with various colors on occasion. I first visited Ghost Hill with the same friend who told me all about these incidents after we finished our shift one day. We started driving at about 11 p.m. 4 of us packed into his Jeep, and to be quite honest, I was scared and excited because of all of these stories. We drove past his house, his aunt's house, and reached the plaque. We slowed down so he could show us where it was, because it's too hard to spot it in the dark. At this point, nothing had happened, so we kept driving and reached the end of the road, which is the T intersection. As we do a U-turn to head back onto the road and drive down Ghost Hill again, we noticed a car coming from the other road. It appeared to be an old-style Ford Mustang from either the 60s or 70s and had a white-on-white finish. Again, it was dark, but this car never once slowed down, and it turned the corner on a dime. Next thing we knew, it was right behind us and tailing hard. My friend decided to floor his Jeep as we flew by the plaque once again, and this car was not giving us a second. It kept flashing its high beams behind us and we were essentially racing down the
see the headlights in the reflection off the wires.
We reached the second stop sign,
then they'll
which
disappear
indicates the end
behind
of
the small
Ghost Hill,
slope,
and the car
usually to
behind us
resurface
swerves
seconds
to our
later.
left.
Doesn't slow
Except
down
these
or
times
stop
for the
they
stop
didn't.
sign. And
There were
once
no
again
side
turns left
roads.
on a dime.
It was
and
in a mostly
disappears down
flat
the roadway.
field area. The same area both times. There was no time for this car to even turn down a side road if there was one to turn down.
Can't format anything through
It's as
Ingor
simple as
because I'm at
oncoming
work,
lights
but
were
I can
there.
update once I'm home.
They got lost behind the slope, and once I reached the peak of the slope, there was absolutely no car to be found. Vanished into thin air. I am so baffled by this. I'm glad the second time my friend was with me, because I told her about it the first time and she didn't believe me. The look on her face was priceless. I've been trying to do some research into it, but sightings seem to be few and very scattered. Have you or anyone ever experienced this phenomena? Did you see just headlights or an entire vehicle? Was it on a highway or a back road? Did you see it multiple times or just once and gone? Could you see a person in the vehicle? If so, how do they look? This is such a shot in the dark, but I would love feedback. I'm so engrossed in this right now, and I love to hear about other experiences.